All right, folks, we have last session of the week. Hopefully it's been a good week for everyone. We're excited to have Balfour Beatty come and present for us today. Evan Mace, National VP of Operations, and Haley Smith, leader in National Acquisitions. They're going to talk to us today talking about how they've gotten their frontline employees utilizing Domo, owning their business, and getting more access and understanding and how to drive their own business from their perspective. So without further ado, if you guys wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ashish. Good afternoon, and let's grab anyone out in the hall we can. There's plenty of seats, so feel free. I know it's end of the day, and we're the last session before the closing, and then what's really important, the reception and more music tonight. So, well, Haley and I are pleased to be here and excited to be able to share our story. And Ashish, thanks for doing a good intro. How many people in the audience are in the design and construction business? Okay, so a few folks. All right, designers, builders, owners? Suppliers, okay, good, excellent. Well, stay tuned, we'll talk about that aspect in a minute. So, for those of you who don't know, construction is a very complex, very dangerous business, and data is not necessarily one of the first things that comes into our people's minds. We create a lot of data, but in terms of using it in order to drive the business is not something that comes natural. So what we're also going to share with you is our journey as we've used Domo to help us with our visual management strategy, and that in turn increased our data literacy across the business. So Haley and I are really both spend most of our time working with the front lines. Haley primarily with our sales teams across the country, and myself with our operations. We are not, as a disclaimer, analysts or IT, right? That's not in our background. So we spend most of our time working with the business, and then we leverage our visual management platform, Domo, to help drive better outcomes with those teams, okay? So that's a little just background about us. And this is just a little framework that I like to use, and we're going to come back to this slide a couple of times throughout our session, about how do we spend our time. And so, this a little audience participation here in a minute, but step one is working on the process, or the process of producing something that our customers will pay us for. This is the most valuable way to spend our time. That process, we generally want to know how is it performing, and so we generate some outcomes, right? And we spend a lot of time reporting on the outcomes, and you've heard a lot about automating reporting over the last 2 days. And then those outcomes, depending on if they're good or bad, create consequences, right? And so when it's a bad consequence, we have to react and we have to fight some fires, right? So how many people spend more time firefighting than they would like? Reacting to things, right? Okay? And that's the challenge in construction, is really a firefighting industry. It's not a literal fire, but it's fighting daily issues that come and change within our business. And so the challenge that we constantly come across is our people generally want to improve the process, but they really don't have time to take away because they're so busy focused on dealing with the consequences and firefighting or reporting the outcomes. And so what we're going to share with you today is how we really transformed and took the time that we were spending on reporting and shifted it left using visual management, which was really just at a glance view of how the process is working and detecting abnormal from abnormal immediately so you can take action. And our goal with that is to drive better outcomes that then reduce time spent firefighting. So these are kind of our key learning objectives for the day that we're just going to share along our journey as a company and most recently within Domo, a little bit more about that transformational process and some ideas we have for each of you. So for those of you who don't know, Balfour Beatty is a global infrastructure company. We do design and construction primarily in the United Kingdom, the United States, and Hong Kong. Within the United States, we are one of the top 10 builders in the country, doing civil works, roads, bridges, rail, and commercial buildings. Across the whole entire globe, we do about $10 billion worth of revenue a year. From a U.S. and just from a why we exist, what's our purpose, this is probably a good slide that sums it up. We are relentless allies for the dreams we're entrusted to build. What that means is we have owners or architects that come and say, hey, we are trying to create this new building. We need to build it reliably, safely, and they trust us with that mission. And some great works and some great monuments as well as public assembly and commercial spaces, some of which you probably occupy today. And some of our core values around people first. Construction is a challenging business. It's a people business. Each one of our projects brings together our team with the team of probably 50 other contractors each and every time, and we recreate that every 2 years is when we're assembling new teams. So we spend a lot of time on that. We bring a lot of workers together, and construction is dangerous, and so zero harm, making sure everybody goes home the same way they showed up to the job, or if they were a visitor, that they weren't harmed by our construction is critical to us. And lastly, client satisfaction. So delivering on our promises and delivering the best building and the best project experience we can are some of our core values. And so who is Balfour Beatty? Where did they come from? Well, Balfour Beatty, as we know it today, became in existence in 2007 when they bought Centex Construction Company. And for a long period of time, it was really more of a holding company. And what I mean by that is that they would buy these regional contractors and take all the collective earnings and put them together and add them all up. And the regional companies that you can see here on this list have been in existence, many of them since 1885, or they were over 100 years old, very successful companies with those same core values for a long period of time. And we're going to get into what kind of challenges that created for us as we look at it from a national business. So we have shifted here in the last couple of years of moving away from that holding company model to more of an operating company model, which has driven more focus on how we're working together as a unit. So just a quick snapshot, some facts and figures. So in the last 12 years since we were purchased by Balfour Beatty, we grew from $2.2 billion to $3.8 billion in revenue, 6% annual growth. Our safety, which was a major cultural shift for us because of the liability in the United Kingdom for accidents is much higher than it is the US, really installed a new level of thinking around how we engineer out risk on our projects. And so that's been one of our most positive impacts. We've seen our safety accident rate go way down since our acquisition in 2007 and way below industry average. The number of offices, so where we cover across the United States, has significantly increased. And so this also creates challenges as trying to be consistent and deploy something around the country. And our number of employees has gone up from 1,400 to 2,400. So that's just to give you some stats and facts about who we are and some of the challenges we're trying to deal with. And as I mentioned, each one of our offices then supports some number of projects. In some markets, that could be like 24, in others it's 70. And every project, as you can see here, has a team of people. So when we're talking about deploying or leveraging Domo, we're not only talking about putting it in each of those offices we talked about, 14 offices, but also within each of these teams that these projects are running. So how does that look when we look at our Domo journey over the last 3 or 4 years? And you can see this chart. So we started in 2015, and we're going to talk a little bit about this journey, but we kind of steadily increased. And then in 2018, we had this significant spike. And so you're going to say, Bevan, what's the cause for the spike? And so you can see here in 2016-17, we averaged, in the low 40s, high 80s in both those years, and then we jumped up to 220. And really, as you can see, the big difference there is we started initially back to that data literacy. Our leaders weren't comfortable with the data. The data's not right. We're not comfortable with it. Don't waste our people's time with it. And it wasn't until 2018 that we said, no, we're ready to finally go to the front line. So it took us 2 years for them to be comfortable with it. We went to the front line, and that's now where we've seen the drive and adoption and the spike in usage. And we're going to get into some of those examples. So 3, what we would consider key enablers or barriers, if you don't focus on these, to driving that adoption. And first and foremost is your culture and how your leaders act. And so construction is very much historically a command and control environment. So people do the work and they report up to the leaders, and the leaders make a decision on, are you doing good or bad? And if you're bad, then here's what you need to go do to fix it, right? And so changing that culture, both from a leader and the people that are at the front lines who are conditioned, is a significant challenge. And so what we are trying to move from is this reporting information up, which is very slow, takes time to act, and does not work, to empowering our front lines. And what that means is our leaders, rather than telling them what to do, need to steer them towards targets, or here's what success looks like, here's how we keep score. And so that's really what we've been able to leverage through our visual management Domo platform, is to create more consistency on what those goals are and empower those front lines. The other big key enabler is standards. And so before, as you saw in all those offices, we had every division or every office had a different way that they could keep score. We're fine, we're doing well, but it was within their own parameters of how they define success. And so we had varying expectations and varying accountability across the business. And now what we have done is we've created a simple and consistent national view that we can look at every project or every business and say, how are we doing? And it's measured the same way. And that's been a huge game changer for us. And lastly, is data architecture. And so one of the good things that we did when we bought all those companies along the way was we forced them to get onto one finance system and also onto one email system. And so that at least, and some of our core other systems. So we at least had single systems. We didn't have a lot of systems that we were dealing with, but the systems were all still in their silos and they didn't talk. And I know everyone in this room has seen the use of Excel or email to exchange information. PowerPoint would be another one. And so we had a lot of our silos were replicating data because they couldn't access it another one. And so what we're doing now is integrating and automating the data, and Domo is the way we pull all those pieces together. So that's kind of the background. Those are the three key enablers that we have seen that when we do them well, we see progress, and when we don't address them, we slow down. So leader, culture behaviors, standards, and data architecture. And so now what we'd like to do is walk you through kind of the years of Balfour Beatty and our adoption. And so we're going to start in 2016. And in 2015, we went and we selected a tool to help us with this. We identified some initial metrics because we said we need to have a consistent way of looking at each of our projects. And so in 2016 at the beginning is when we launched what we called our project dashboard. And you'll see I put it up there for leader because our leaders were so worried that this would go out to the project teams and they didn't trust it. They thought it was going to waste a lot of time. That they said, no, we're just going to keep it at the leader level. And so we had some very simple metrics that said, how is every project that we could look at across the business the same way? So at least started the conversation and at least helped us understand maybe where, if a card wasn't populating properly, where maybe somebody didn't understand the process, and at least started to get our leaders a little bit comfortable with using the data differently. And one of the things we found is leaders, it's not that they didn't trust the data, but it didn't match what their perception was, right? Does that make sense? So they're like, I know this project got a contract extension, but that's not showing up here, so that must be wrong because the team told me they got the extension. Well, the reality is, if the team didn't change it in the core system, we actually didn't get it. It's not done. And that was one of the things that we started to work through. So now Haley's going to take us through some of the sales work that was ongoing at this time too.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of pepper in some of the sales story as we go through our journey here throughout the years. So from the sales side, we initially started into Domo because the UK business said, we want to get all of our sales information into Domo so we can start comparing apples to apples and see and get a global perspective of our sales. So we set about getting our CRM, Oracle CRM, into Domo, and what happened was essentially we just got all of our dirty laundry aired out. I had majorly been the babysitter of information, looking at reports week to week, this is what I would do. I would run a report, mark it up, send it out, ask people to get things updated, rerun the report, and send it out to leadership. And so it was just a really good example of just showing how bad we were at maintaining our data and information. So this created, as Bevan said, a lot of distrust in our information. Leaders did not trust what they were seeing, so they would ask questions, and then our people would have to go and validate the information, creating rework and frustration. At the same time, we saw a lot of inconsistencies in how people were managing CRM from division to division. And then this was the first time our data was so visible. People were very anxious about what would be shown in Domo. I can't tell you how many conversations I had of people not wanting to have something in CRM because it would show up in Domo. And so they would get asked about it. And so it was a learning curve of understanding how things were showing up, getting comfortable with the information. And throughout that necessary learning curve, what the gains that came out of that first year for us was just that real-time automatic reporting of our sales week to week. So I got hours back in my day, other sales teams got hours back in their weeks because we weren't having to go and do this manually. So it was a big win for us in that first year. So as we move into, going back to, how we're spending our time. So looking at the processes and how we are improving them, we are eliminating waste, finding those inconsistencies, and just improving those processes overall. So as we enter 2017, we started to get more comfortable with our information just being out on display. So our people understood how things were being pulled in. And so 2017 for us was all about how we go, we started to look at our other processes and how we might be able to track and measure ourselves. So at the bottom here is our top 10 operational success factors. And these have been around in our business for quite some time, and I'm sure Bevan will touch on them on the project side. But Domo allowed us really for the first time to be able to track and measure against how we're doing against these operational success factors. My life has largely consisted of our gated business lifecycle at the top. So in 2015, the company introduced a risk and opportunity framework. Maybe some of you have a gated business lifecycle in your business, but basically it's checkpoints. We have 8 gates, and it takes you from a lead and an opportunity, vetting it through to contract, and then on into delivery and turnover to the client. So there's these checks and balances along the way, and for the sales teams, it's gates 1 through 4. And so, we needed a way in which to look at our pipeline and see where we were in the gated business lifecycle and track that accordingly. At the time, we did not have, CRM was not capable of doing this and visualizing this, so what did we do? We created a tool. We went to Smartsheet and basically created 2 points of entry of information, which was a huge pain point for our people, but we needed to be able to see where we were in the process. So people were entering opportunities into CRM, and then they were going and entering it into Smartsheet so that we could track our gates. Come Domo, we saw that with a couple of adjustments in CRM, we could go and visualize this and have an automatic real time. So eliminating that pain point. So it was another win for us to really look and see how we could streamline our processes and get more time back to our people. So then we also looked at how we could use the same information and tailor that. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this, and just, asking ourselves, what does leadership want to pay attention to, and what do our sales teams need to pay attention to, and focusing that data accordingly. So for our leadership team, they meet once a week, and they cover all aspects of the business. But for sales, they wanted to see the top deals that we have going on in the business. So it allowed them to get to a focused conversation much more quickly. Instead of looking at all of the opportunities and all of the pipeline, they could see what they needed to see and have an appropriate conversation. And for our sales teams, again, it's they want to know what's coming due, what's coming up, what do I need to be on top of. So with the sales teams getting this information out to them ahead of their meetings, they could zero in on the focused conversation and spend their time accordingly. So.
Great. So we kind of had the project dashboard for leaders that launched in 2016, and that was kind of playing itself out, and we were trying to get teams to use it in their conversations. And you saw what Haley walked through and from the sales team and how they were using it. And in the background, those were still very much leadership saw that as, well, that's not for us, that's for a different group. That's not at the executive level, right, the C-suite. And so along the way, I just happened to, I was looking at, as I mentioned, safety is one of the things we spend a lot of time on. So there's 1,000 fatalities in construction a year. 20% of workplace fatalities come from construction, which far outpaces the amount that it is of the GDP. So we're constantly trying to figure out how do we have safer job sites. And so at some point in time in this whole journey, I said, let me get our accident data, which it's some of the most important data we have because we have to report on it for OSHA regulations, but nobody was really paying attention to it. And so I extracted it, loaded it into Domo, and I was sorting it out and starting to look at it. And it just so happened our global CEO was in town for some US review meetings, and our safety, senior vice president for safety, we were sitting down and talking, and it just popped up of like, the question was, well, when do our accidents most happen? And corporate communications wouldn't let me put that on the slide because I'm not allowed to ask that question and put that in the public domain, so that's why it's not there. But that simple question, and because we had the data in Domo, and I was nearby, I was sitting in the meeting, I just quickly pulled the data in, and I quickly charted this. And imagine sitting around a bunch of C-suite and global leaders, and they said, well, most of our accidents happen on a Friday in the summer because that's when we do the most construction. And you look at the data, and you're like, well, that's not what the data says. That's not right. And so they quickly started it was like a turning point for the C-suite because they're like, oh, wow, I didn't know we could actually get insights from our data that way, right? And it was challenging what their perception was. And it was just this aha moment, which was crucial because in June, about a month or two later, we had our US leadership team together, and we were talking, well, what are we going to go do next with Domo, and how are we going to leverage it? We've been doing this project dashboard, we were doing this other thing, or the stale stuff, and anyway, we started talking about, well, what are our people saying? And our people are tired of repeating the same work. You heard Haley talk about it. Things are inefficient. We've added more work to them because things have gotten more complex. We haven't taken anything away, and it was like, the question was, how do we transform how we operate, right? And we can't continue working the same way. And we need to improve our individuals, we need to improve our teams and our business because we need to make them more productive. We want our people to have more time in their day, either to spend on more value-adding things or to be able to go home back to that people-first culture, be able to spend time with their families. We wanted our teams to be thinking more proactively, not reactively, and we needed one source of truth throughout the business, not different versions, right? And so what came out of that was all the leadership team said, yes, please go automate what's called our monthly project review, and I'm going to show it to you here in a minute, and go do that as fast as you can. And we're like, okay, that's not what we expected to come out of here, but it was all this buildup because of the gains we had made. And so we had what we called a hack, and so those of you in the technology space would recognize, a hack. And so we laid out some conditions of satisfaction. We gathered a team, and these are all operational people. We had one IT person, Domo. There's a Domo person in that picture there somewhere, and we laid out a timetable. And we got together and we said, okay, we need to take this process, so everyone who has Excel workbooks will recognize this. This is how our teams were expected to do monthly project reviews. And when I say teams, we have at any one point in time 100 to 150 projects over 10 million and another 300 that are under 10 million. And the expectation is that they're running through this workbook once a month. And what you see on the far left is a single really detailed page with an agenda and a bunch of data in it. And then you can't see it, but there are 10 of these. So back to the operational excellence success factors Haley mentioned. There's one of these for each one of them to say, are you doing what we said we were supposed to do, and how well are you doing? So what are the questions, what's the assessment, and what are you going to do about it to improve? So that's what the expectation was. And when we looked at it, we estimated that our teams were spending about 2 days every month putting this together to go have a meeting that they may or may not use 25% of the information. And so we looked at it and we worked as a group and we said, can we bring all those pieces together, right? And so this was our mock-up in 2017. So you see some questions, some metrics, and then you see here, we're like, this assessments and actions stuff, maybe people write their notes down, but maybe they get lost, maybe they're in Excel. Can we somehow incorporate that into what we're trying to do here to make it as simple as possible? So quick, does anyone right now write back any information in their Domo pages they use currently? I didn't think so. So So what we started to explore with Domo was, can we not only bring data from our core systems, but enable two-way dialogue with the system while teams are running through this in their monthly reviews. And so that's kind of where we were. We were developing this in 2017. I'm going to pause there. It's like a little cliffhanger because we were getting ready to launch into 2018, but that's where we were at the end of 2017. And so to pause back to this, we continue to see a major value of Domo was to help us see where we were inconsistent within the business, where we needed to improve our process, where we weren't standard. But also we were starting to analyze the outcomes of it. And so on the sales side or on the safety side and some of the project side, we were starting to see little pockets that we were now seeing things a little bit differently. One of the most interesting things I think was around like profit margin. I can tell, I can't put it on a slide because our finance folks would get upset. But our operations group have responsibility for one set of finance of numbers, and our finance team has another. And you would think they'd be in line, right? That they should be in sync, right? These groups would talk to each other. Not always, right? Because they're always like, well, I'm not going to show that, I'll be okay, or they don't necessarily trust the data they're getting from each other. And so we were starting to uncover by looking at data from both systems where there were disconnects within the business. So in 2018, and now this is where we really made it actionable, we really pushed it out to the front lines. And again, just remember, we're now at the red, okay? So we had that hack, we were looking at an option of how can we take away this pain of 2 days of prep for this monthly project review that we're expecting all of our teams to go do. And so we launched in beginning of January 2018 what we consider we called it our new NPR page on Domo. And so we eliminated the Excel workbook and everything that had to do with it. We said just stop doing it. And all the data gets pulled over here, and you can kind of see we ran it similarly, so you have all the operational excellence success factors. It follows an agenda, and all the stuff that we were talking about was incorporated in it. And so just to give you a little bit more, so remember those 5 elements I told you? There's an agenda, there's questions, there's data, assessments, and actions. And so on the far left, those were some of we went through all the questions, we said these are the most important ones. So we pulled those questions in, and then we have the metrics that then correspond to some of those questions to drive dialogue. And then what you see here next in the, I guess this is in a laser pointer, this third card of the team assessment, what you see there is one of our first apps, the final version of it. So our teams every month are able to log in there real time what their discussion was or what the major takeaways or decisions were. So it's captured, they don't have to go write it down somewhere else or it's captured live, and they can scroll down and they can see, hey, have we been talking about the same issue for a couple months or now, or what's going on here? Why hasn't this gotten better? So they can grade themselves. This team hasn't there, but they say they're on plan, but they can say, we need help, or we're doing better than we thought. And then on the right, the far right are the actions. So they can enter in an action item. And these are not individual action items. We're not trying to get into that day-to-day routine. This is how's the team holding itself accountable, right? So this is really a business process around our review and making sure when we say we're going to go do something, we think it's important to help the job, that we actually go and do it. So every month the team goes back and reviews this, and these, once they get completed, they'll roll off, right? And so you can quickly see, are we doing, or are we actually getting them done, or are we just fooling ourselves, or do we need help? Does somebody need help to take something off the list? So this has been a major change for us in terms of getting the teams to follow through with this what we consider one of our most critical business processes, because we step back and we assess the whole job, but also in terms of getting visibility into what the discussion is going. Because before, if you weren't there, you didn't know. And now I can go and look, or one of the other division leaders or national leaders can say, what's going on in that job as it relates to safety? There's probably a lot of data here. The AI folks, we probably could go mine and get some more insights from. So we eliminated the report. But then the other thing that we eliminated, we found out, much like the smart sheet Haley was talking about, was we had a report on the reports. Okay? And actually our people would say the NPR I showed you was a report of reports, because there were 26 other reports that fed into that. So we actually had reports of reports of reports. And so what we found was we are now able to eliminate that because because they were logging their information within the page, we were actually able to capture the metadata of which jobs did what assessment on what day. And so you can see on the far left there, how many of our projects were doing their monthly project reviews, and were they capturing actions, yes or no, or were they active in Domo? So we were able to provide visibility to our process, and you were like, man, Bevan, you said there were 100 projects, why aren't you up to 100? I will tell you, I was just in Texas a month ago, and when I went there and did the training in January, January the first year, of how many were doing the process, the answer was, well, we start them, but then we get busy and we stop doing them. And this time when I went back, they're like, no, we do them. Everybody raised their hand. So we have made a sea change in a fundamental business process and driving accountability around to it as well because of what we've been able to roll out.
So on the sales side and how we went about making our pipeline actionable is looking at how we could set our cards up to track to goals and track and help our people understand where the action needs to occur. So our example here with the sales goals is actually this was probably one of the first times we had sales goals be so visible, which was a win, so we could track to those goals with our revenue and with our awards. But one of the questions we started to ask ourselves, and really, I should back up, it's really questions that we started to introduce into these conversations of what do we need to be looking at? And so, for instance, do we have enough pipeline? If we have a goal of, about a little less than 200 million in government work, do we have enough in our pipeline to get after that? And so we had set pipeline goals based on win rates and our success in the past and things like that. And then we pumped in our current pipeline and we quickly found out, no, we don't. We need to go and find opportunities to make sure that we can hit our goal. So Domo really helped us to figure out a means to show where we needed to pay attention. Another good example is we have a scoring metrics for how good our opportunities are. So thinking about what's the quality of our pipeline. And so Domo helped us to visualize that as well and just show, with the pipeline we currently have, is it good? Where do we need to pay attention on making those opportunities better? So, and that's for our sales teams. And for our leadership, and this example came up last year at half year. So our CEO, Leon, wanted to know how many contracts were out there for the rest of the year, and when were they expected to close? When were we expected to get those contracts? And the questions he wanted to ask is there any way we can improve on those dates? Can we close early? We have a goal at the end of the year. Is there anything we can do in this to push those forward? So again, focusing on, we have a lot in December. Is there anything we can do to move those earlier and make sure we close those opportunities? The other thing we started to do in 2018 is we set up division pages. So each division has their own page. Our people wanted to immediately be able just to go in and see Texas information rather than seeing everybody having to filter. So we eliminated some of that friction and helped our people just dive right in. And so with that, we were able to start using reports. So I mentioned our sales teams have weekly meetings, and so we set up reports so that a day or two ahead of their meeting, they're getting a report of Domo to say, here's what's going on in your sales page. You might have some opportunities you need to go update, and they can go do that ahead of the meeting. So instead, the information is already up to date once they get to the meeting, and they're not wasting time pointing out things that are wrong and having to go down those rabbit holes. So reports allowed us to pull our people into the information. So it was a really great way of getting them to go to Domo to look at their information. So our data quality increased. Leadership were getting these reports too, so people knew that these were getting looked at. And so it also helped us be more transparent across the board. So our finance teams are also looking at this. They're on the reports. So it just allowed us to get more accountability, more transparency across the board.
Great. Thanks, Haley. So somebody mentioned they were a supplier, and so it leads us as a great segue into strategic procurement. And so as a builder and buying materials and services across the country, across the globe, we have, at least in the US, 66, what we consider 66 strategic partners. These are vendors that we believe provide strategic value to us in a variety of different ways. And so it's important as a national business that we leverage them in the best of our abilities. And so we track, and we've now, and this started a little bit in 17, but really was in 18, looking at how much spend and which of our vendors are actually we're using the most, right? Where's the most usage or utilization coming from? And then, and that was kind of the left, it was kind of the first starting point. And one of the things that we consistently see is it's one thing to be able to say, where are you? It's another thing to know how well are you doing, right? And that's a big difference. And so what you see on the second side, on the second card there is the blue is what was our plan, what did we hope to do, right? What was our utilization target? And the orange or amber there is where are we? And so then the conversation is not just, well, here we are as a status update, but what are we going to do to close the gap? Or why did we have an appliances? Why did we have triple our projection? Was that because the original assumptions were wrong, or did something else change? Maybe an owner specced something differently and we had a lot of extra strategic spend within one particular category. Variety of different reasons, but at least we're prompting the dialogue to see where are the differences and what can we go do about it. So that was strategic procurement. And then remember that C-suite, right, the executive leaders, right? And we were talking about projects and sales teams. Well, last year, at the same time we had rolled out the project review, and that was working so well because we had saved 2 days per project. We then said, well, how long are we spending getting ready for these business reviews, right? And this is not just a project engineer, but this is like your VP of finance or your business development team putting together PowerPoints. And what we found was they were spending 2 weeks developing PowerPoints and charts and stuff like that. And we said, what if we just stop that? What if we just eliminated that and we just used the cards that we had, because we already had the sales cards, we had some operations cards, we had some safety cards, and so we flushed them out, and so we cover in a page, we stop the PowerPoints and all these charts over here. Now the finance folks, how many folks are from finance? All right, I'm sorry. But the finance folks are so wed to the reports they get out of our ERP system, so we still rely on those, right? All of our financial reporting still goes that way. But everything else is really being leveraged off of our business review page, and it covers safety, it covers talent, which is critical to us. Back to the people. Are we keeping the people? Are we losing people? Who have we hired? Are they getting onboarded properly? Sales, operations, and finance. And so the interesting story here was, again, back to accountability, is now that accountability level was moving from the front lines to where? To the middle management layer, right? And so now that gets a little bit uncomfortable because they're usually the ones that are supposed to be holding everyone else accountable. And now what we were finding was, well, why did these people leave? And what was the reason for that? Or why are the sales? Well, no, my sales numbers aren't where they should be. Well, that's because, back to some of what Haley said, it was really getting more painfully obvious that we weren't consistent on a couple of key processes. And by doing it at the business review, drove that conversation. And so the first round was very painful because that was really level setting across the business on our key expectations at the management level. And by the second round, it was much easier and much smoother. Everyone kind of understood it. So it was interesting. One division president I talked to, this is the way he put it, was you can quickly find out if you have the right people or not, which was a weird way of talking about it, right? But he's like, if they don't understand what's on the card, then they don't understand what's important in the business, right? And so it's actually become a really good, one, identification or a gap. If somebody asks a question, you need to train somebody there. And B, as across the whole business, just create that consistency. So this was, again, how we took it from the front lines, but then bringing it all the way up through the leadership ranks. So how do we use our time differently? We still keep going back to the process and finding gaps. And we're constantly going back and finding more and more places we're not consistent. We're analyzing the outcomes way more, back to my comment, does the audio match the video? So we're constantly looking at it. I think now we're trying to look, the sales data, does the sales data coming out of CRM, what the sales teams use, match what the revenue is that's coming out of the finance? Like all those kind of questions. And it's interesting, normally you just look at it, you have a report from one source or one data system, but now we're quickly combining it and saying they do match or they don't match. And thankfully, credit Haley for this. We just did, it was in late 2018, right? We did the review. Our finance team really wanted to know, and how close were we? And there were a couple of things that were fluctuated, but most of it was in sync, and there weren't any material changes was the final verdict. And I think a lot of that goes back to the early days in 2016, because we'd constantly been improving on our data quality. And that was something we joked about. We've joked about that for years.
Still do.
That finance doesn't trust sales, and sales, et cetera. So, but I think the other one was this fire. In terms of the consequences now, instead of wasting time on fighting fires, we're preventing fires. And so, add a little more context to the example Haley talked about with the half year with our CEO. In the past, when that question would have gotten asked, is what projects, what can we get booked by the end of half year? And that would be an email that would go out to all the sales team. Tell us what's possible. And it would be a mass distribution. People would run reports. They would go figure it out, and they would spend a lot of time, right, trying to fight that. Or worst case scenario, we'd fight out after half year we didn't meet our target, right, and then we'd be in the firefighting mode. Well, in this case that Haley was mentioning, our CEO, we were able to identify 5 projects across the business, and we were able to go, that were within 2 weeks of the half year, and we were able to go have very targeted conversations with those individuals of, is there any way to move it back? So we didn't waste a lot of people's time. We knew what we were doing before we got to the end of half year, and it was a very targeted conversation, which is not one that would have ever happened prior. So, just an example. And so in 2019, really what is most on our minds is how do we get more value? So we have all this data. Luckily, from what I saw over the last 2 days, most of our people aren't card builders, right? That's something we're working on. So we don't have a lot of card sprawl, but we do have a lot of data tied in. And so it's how do we get more value out of it? And so just I could give you a bunch of examples and talk to you about all the version 2s or 3s that we're working on and everything you saw. But we're really, this is something we launched at the beginning of this year. We're focusing as much as we can back on the people side. And so our HR department, we decided a year or 2 ago to go to quarterly reviews rather than annual reviews, meaning that it used to be all the reviews got done in like 1 or 2 months of the year, right? That was the cycle, which meant if you had 10 direct reports, you had to do 10 performance reviews in that period of time, which was a lot. So now we switched it to quarterly reviews so that you had your review in the month you were hired, so it would spread those 10 over the course of the whole year. Well, the unfortunate thing was that created all this reporting work that the HR analysts were then doing in the back of house, merging all the spreadsheets with all the performance review data, and to send it all out to tell everyone how they were doing. And they would do it on a Friday afternoon, because that's when all the data was in from the week and when they had time to do it. So by Monday morning, when anybody would look at it, that data was a couple days old. And anyway, they were talking about going back because it was taking them so much time and effort to tell people who had an open review. They were going to go back to the annual review process. We said, well, hold on a second. You're bringing this data over here and that data over here. I think we can just automate it. And so what we did is we automated, and Haley mentioned the scheduled reports. So we now have these cards that are automated, and rather than waiting weekly, they're actually updated daily. And first thing Monday morning, they get automatically sent to the division leadership team on how they're doing, on how many performance reviews are open, how many of the employees still have to do their own review, how many managers have a review open that they could go act on. And here's the rundown of who's doing what. And oh, by the way, if you click on the email name, it'll actually create an email for them with a subject line, and they can take action on it. So that's how we're driving it down to the next level. With you heard the personalized PDP, am I saying that right? The new feature. Our goal is actually to get this so that the supervisor and the employee, we're doing it at a division or an office level. Our goal is to use personalized PDP to actually get them so the supervisor knows every week how they're doing and if they're behind or ahead. So that's how we're trying to get it bent, again, back down to what's most important to us is our people. How do we use our data to drive better performance review, which hopefully then drives better development and retention of our people. So with that, I'll just close the key enablers, the culture, leader behaviors, standards, data architecture. I don't know, Haley, if you have anything you want to chime in on. But those, again, continue to be struggles for us. We don't have them solved. We work on them every day. I remember when we rolled out our new NPR, we have a roll-up that says which projects did an NPR or not. And I had to coach our folks, is like, don't resist the urge to pick up the phone and say, you need to go in and fill in this so it reports right. You need to be asking, you need to ask why. You need to coach them on that, not just drive that traditional approach. So we continue to learn and work on these three areas. And how can you apply this? We heard kind of the start, think big and go small. Well, quite honestly for us, we were working in pockets. What really drove was that safety conversation, which started with some data that is really important to us, but not a lot of people were paying attention to it, and it created this spark. I don't know where that would be in your businesses, but you can kind of think about what's most important to your business or what's your biggest pain point and start there and build from there. Pdca is Plan-Do-Check-Act. So you constantly, and we heard this with the various cards, right? You're never gonna get it right the first time. Rather than trying to get it 100%, just start somewhere, iterate it and iterate it and iterate it and continue to improve. And I think we're on like a third generation of CRM changes because we continually learn like, hey, that's not working the way we wanted, we need to fix this, and we go back. And before we would do CRM updates like never.
Never, yeah.
We would never, so now we're actually refining our core systems as we learn more of how we need to see it to tie it into our finance system or somewhere else. And then lastly, and I started this example, is coach. So as leaders and as analysts or whatever your role is, this is a different skill set. And I think we're so used to when we see a problem, we have to go solve the problem. At least in operations, I have that. I've had to work on that a lot. And I think I would encourage you to ask open-ended questions. That is the best way. Why does this show the NPR isn't done in our case? Or why are we showing all this extra pipeline for this target? Or why is there a difference? Those are much better questions than the data's wrong, you need to go fix it. And I think that relies on our individuals and our leaders to take a more coaching approach, which our people will appreciate more so, and they're gonna follow you a lot further with that kind of a leadership style. So with that, I think we're at a wrap and open for questions.
So the app you made to actually do the manual inputs, the yellow, red, green, and to be able to put in free text, is those things that are available, are they open through the App Store that you can get, or would we have to go back and recreate?
I would probably default to talk to your Domo. I will tell you that, and I may speak out of place, so our Domo team will help us. I mean, we built that in partnership with them, and it wasn't a feature. We are actually looking at, do we do it in ServiceNow? Do we collect that and we tie it in? And we got convinced that it was faster to do it within the app, but it was a feature that Domo didn't have. And so we actually built it together. And then this is kind of the good and the bad. Is the good that our teams were using it. The bad was they broke the underlying platform, and I think it was late last year. We'd scaled it so much and we were putting so much pressure on it that I think it got upgraded to another version. I think that's some of what, I think I heard something about write back is coming or is out. So I think it's starting to leak its way out there, and everyone, we were the beta testers to try to drive that functionality. So I believe you should be able to leverage that write back feature. How you do it, if you have to build an app to leverage it, I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's currently in an app environment.
Currently, we're struggling to have where people are saying they don't trust the data, and leaders saying that. And what did you do to get over that hurdle?
Oh gosh, well, I think it's just continuously, I think the reporting helped, getting it in front of our people week to week. It led to that accountability, and probably our leaders, our people saying, no, it's right. The data and information is right. or if it's wrong, they immediately know like what they needed to go fix. Most of our information that we constantly have to keep up is with dates. That's really hard. We're tracking RFPs, we're tracking when we think contracts are coming due, and it shifts all the time. So, I think just the weekly reports, getting it in front of people week to week helped that a lot.
Yeah, and I think that helps, and it's kind of that cadence. If you go like month to month,
Yeah.
that's like, there's so much time, and you got to have a routine. And what we would do, like on the dates, for example, we would have a small group that we knew could link into that and fix that. And so rather than trying to roll out a whole page with a bunch of stuff that we knew was maybe 50% right, say, okay, we see a gap here, let's go fix that so we have a higher certainty, and it may not be 100%, and I'm a big fan of 90% is probably okay, right? So it was using those groups to make sure we at least were somewhere within the realm of possibility. And then we've now reached the point that people generally trust it. So we're kind of on the other side, but you saw that adoption. It took us 2 years to kind of get to that point. And you can't just jump in, and the more cards you have, the more rabbit trails, it's harder. So that's why starting small is you build confidence, and then you can grow from there.
Just two questions, if I may. Please, which CRM system are you using that couldn't give you the reports? And second question is, for your reporting, where do the people enter their data into before it goes into Domo?
So we're using Oracle. Can you repeat the second question? I didn't catch that.
About the reporting, about the reports that take 2 days each to write, the guys are spending out in the field every month, that goes up to your aggregations. How are they actually entering that data now? Are you using the spreadsheets before?
Are you talking about the project review?
Yeah.
It's all in the app.
Yeah.
So all of it, all the spreadsheets are gone, the reports of the spreadsheets are gone, and it's all in the app. So that's, whereas before you would have had to find the Excel file and open it up, now you can just go right there.
Thanks. Great presentation, guys. So I'm curious about the business review. I think you said you're doing it quarterly. You mentioned, obviously, it's easier to prepare. You've got it automated in Domo. So two-part question. Was there any other benefits that have come with just wide adoption by having that in Domo and having it less painful for people? And additionally, as you were integrating it into Domo, shifting the process, did you come across pain points that you had to address, or were there any new features that were needed that have come up since you've done that?
Specifically around the business review, or?
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, do you have any? I mean, I think it was interesting. So we did our business reviews last year, and now we have actually monthly touch points. And so we've actually now, that business review I showed you for 2018 were like big deep dives. And now we've adopted smaller, we've now gravitated to a smaller stack that's monthly, and we're still sorting out, okay, when will we do the deep dive and will we go back to that? But now we're just in a monthly cycle, and it's actually, so, which again reduces that batch size, and we're paying attention to it more. In terms of features, I mean, I think I'm not sure if I understand, like things that we were missing. Is that what you're asking? I think the thing that we struggle with is we want to do benchmarking. Like we want to know people to know how they're doing against their peers, but we want that to make it easy for them to see how they're doing. And so we're talking about, do we use PDP to help have an overall view so you can see how you're doing against peers, but quickly go into your own page? That's one. And then I'm encouraged by some of the stuff we heard about dynamic groups. That's something we struggle with, is like getting people, we have a lot of data, and Haley and I both know where it's at, like in general, but somebody else who isn't is like helping them navigate the user experience to find and get an answer. That's something that that's like getting more value, is like we got to make it easier for them and make it easier for them to create their own alerts or do their own work. Right now it's mostly curated for them, but I think there's a lot more potential they could get from it. So that's kind of where we're at. Hopefully does that answer your question?
Actually, one of my questions got answered already about the CRM system. But what I wanted to do is send some insight to the person who had mentioned about getting adoption and the idea of data. We're about 2 years into our process, And what we're actually finding, or did find, was that reluctance to accept the data. And a couple of interesting points are, we found there's reports that have been going to management that have been entrenched in the business for like 20 years, and they're just assumed correct. And so one of the first questions we would ask when we present a card is, if it's not correct, compared to what? And a lot of times you find it's an Excel spreadsheet that's found its way through 6 different people, and the Excel spreadsheet's been wrong for 20 years or manipulated, and just to kind of hide things. So a lot of that journey I think you need to take is, when they don't trust the data, ask them what they're comparing it against and track the source of that, and almost pretty good in the end.
Yeah, a good example of that, there's another question, is like anytime we publish our number of people, the HR folks initially are like, well, that's wrong, that doesn't match. Like, my report shows that we only have 2380. Well, when was that from? Well, that was from March 1st. Well, guess what? There's been 20 days between now and then. You think we might have added or lost some, and that's, the people trust what they're used to, and so you're challenging their context. So, great point, thank you. Was there another question in the back?
If you could just touch on your safety focus. You mentioned Domo helped you identify trends in incidents, and I'm just curious, why was there such a big misconception prior to Domo? And was there a correlation between the safety incidents and retention from a HR perspective?
I think the difference is kind of what we heard before, is you kind of have your own story, right? That you kind of makes sense to you, and so, but a story without the data isn't trusted, right? And I think that's where people know what they know, and they don't know what they don't know. And so they visit jobs and they hear those stories they went to, and they kind of put their own explanation together. And that's when if you can't get your hands around all the data and see it easily, it's easy to get trapped into that. And so that's where, at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily say that data, I trust that data without really understanding the story either. And that's where we're still working on it, is like we are working on a lot more predictive analytics from our safety observations. Where do we have issues? We're not where we want to be with our safety data. We're still trying to pull together, but it was a good example of just getting people at a high level to challenge their assumptions using the data, which is what the trigger was for us. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day.